Thank you all for joining our recap of the area board meeting for the Gwinnett County Public Schools. Before we get into our breakdown of the different board meetings across the county, just want to make a few quick announcements. First off, we do have our May 17th 100 Years of Malcolm X event, which will be held at the Bogan Park Community Center. There's still time for you to get your tickets to that event. Is only $10. You will hear the great Professor Sam Livingston out of Morehouse. He will be our guest speaker for that particular event. You can get your tickets at www.gwinnettnaacp.org. Again, that's www.gwinnettnaacp.org to purchase your tickets. Come out, bring your kids out, learn about Malcolm X. We know he's one of the people that are that's not under celebrated, that's not really celebrated enough in our community. Although, he's had a very huge impact from, the Alex Haley book about Malcolm X to the movie with Denzel Washington, directed by Spike Lee on Malcolm X. But this is a good chance for young people to come out and get educated about Malcolm, his life, what he stood for, especially in, given the current climate of the situation with the felon in chief in office. This is a good time to know how we need to be resisting this current administration by learning those lessons from Malcolm. We also do have our upcoming Juneteenth event, and we're still and if you are a vendor that'd like to sign up for that event, there's still time to do that. That'll be on June 21st at from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. Vendors can sign up at GwinnettNAACP.org. Like all our events, just go to the events page on our website, and you can register for that particular event and go from there. And so with that being said, we will get started. And kind of how what we'll do is we're going to show a few clips, just a few highlights, some things that kind of stood out to us as far as videos that occurred, different clips of the area board meeting across the different counties. And we'll kind of go in the order that they did the actual area board meetings. So the first area board meeting was board member Knutson, and that was in District 2 in North Gwinnett. So we'll pick a few things from his board meeting and just have some discussion on it and just have some dialogue and feedback. And then at the very end, what we'll do just to wrap things up, we'll just kind of put a close on what our thoughts was about the board meeting with some things that we feel like could be improved, because we did see some things that can be improved upon, but also a lot of positives as well. So that being said, let's get started here. Let me get the screen shared.
We're not saving money from you all so that we can go buy land.
Since this elected board gets paid in their positions, why aren't they foregoing their paychecks for the good of Gwinnett students, teachers, and staff?
Yeah, you think I should?
Well, let me first start. I think the important thing to remember is change is always going to be hard. And I said this the other day. If change is hard, harder change feels insurmountable. And I know that during that space of change, there's always going to be a range of emotions, right? And so there's stages of grief that we all kind of are at different spaces on that continuum. I will say that the work that the board has done, starting with the charging the transition plan, and then being very lock and step, as I mentioned, had a chance to spend a pretty significant amount of time with each one of them individually. I'm really encouraged to know that there is no us versus them. Okay? They're with us, and they didn't have to be. I've been in spaces and I've seen spaces where changes are made, and people hide. They back up and they let someone else deal with it. It takes courage to even be willing to be in a space like this and to engage in these type of opportunities. Sight unseen, right? Didn't see any of these questions beforehand, and so I really, if I can impress anything, moving forward, particularly at this point, they've been lock and step, and I can speak with no hesitations that there has been a desire, I think, to be extra transparent and making sure that everyone's along the way. So I don't know if that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say that there's been conversations in the past while I've been on the board that the board needs to make more money, and that there need to be more board members. I'm flabbergasted at that. We don't control. We're tied to the state legislature. Our board did that years ago. The board that created and worked with Mr. Wilbanks, a fantastic, unbelievable system that this is. So we get the same stipend as our state legislators, and it's and so we are not going to vote ourselves any more money. And just like you, if you came across a windfall, you have no idea what I'm doing with that stipend. You don't know what I'm doing charitably. You don't know what I'm trying to make a difference in terms of my community or whatever. And every one of us has that opportunity to do and be a steward of what they have. I can tell you this, that there have been some things that the board has done along the way that have lowered my hourly rate significantly, as we have to do all the things that we do to try to stay up on what we do. So that's I think it's fair. I think to ask for any more would be silly. I think to ask for anyone else to jump into this and create 7 or 9 members on the board would be silly. I've got 200,000 constituents. Each of us do in our districts. People will complain, well, you don't have, the ability to manage all of your, well, okay. How many board members would it take without any assistance? We share, we have one assistant that kind of keeps us, together. So no one's asking for, assistance and other people to manage the things that we do. Like I said earlier, that would just be a silly waste of time and money. But there is something to going through a $3.4 billion budget. There is something to looking through the PO, the purchase order report, every purchase that's over $2,000 and how we've managed that. So it's not an easy job, but it's a job that we need more people to be willing to do, quite honestly. And so I did not run for office. I didn't even know there was a stipend when I ran for office. So it's kind of silly on my part, because if I had been doing this for free, y'all tried to manage a school district through a worldwide pandemic. I was talking to someone recently. They said you couldn't pay me $1 million to do what you do. Did you take a person's money and their kids and put it together? No way. I'm not making those decisions. So, you've heard that from some of my fellow board members about how hard this job is. But yeah, it's hard. And there's no award for it. But from my perspective, there's a reward. And that reward is creating a system that every one of us would be proud to have our kids go through. That's why I'm here.
All right. So I'm gonna stop sharing and just we'll have a little dialogue on that first conversation. So I seen that question come up a lot, and I think I get the premise of it. It pretty much was at every board meeting. The 2 or 3 I went to in person and the other 2 that I watched on video. Hey guys, the school board makes less than the max unemployment, which ain't a lot. I mean, it's the equivalent to about $325 a week is what the school board makes, about $15K a year. If anything, I feel like given the level of responsibility school board members have and the level of influence they have on the educational system, I'm of the opinion them as well as the state legislature should be making at least $40,000 a year. Mainly because, you know, when that pay is that low, it's only a certain type of person economically that can run for that position. And what I mean by that is because it's a part-time role, because the pay is so low, you know, somebody that needs a regular 9 to 5, that works a regular 9 to 5 couldn't do that. This would have to be somebody that's middle class, makes about 60, 70,000 a year, and can take that time away from their job to do that and make the extra 15K. But if you were somebody who maybe had a degree in public policy and wanted to do that full time, you wouldn't be able to do that. You'd have to have another job. I mean, because again, we're talking about, I mean, it's pretty much almost minimum wage to do that job. So the talks about, you know, cutting their pay, I mean, the pay is already, you know, bottom of the barrel. I think that's kind of, you know, out of bounds for anybody to be asking. I get the sentiment because, again, you know, citizens are upset that, you know, the district had to spend $750,000 to remove Dr. Watts, you know, 300 and some thousand, I think, to remove Will Banks, terminate that contract early, and then, you know, however much, you know, hundreds of thousands they may be spending on 2 search firms, one for when Will Banks were removed, and now we're spending more money again on another search firm. So I get the premise of what people are saying when they ask that at every board meeting, but I do think that board members are underpaid, you know, Gwinnett included, or all board members, because they're all under the state law, are underpaid given the level. And I think the pay needs to increase so that, you know, again, it's not only the rich or middle class people that can run for school board position, but everyday workers can run for school board position because it does pay a living wage for them to be able to do that type of work. So I'm of the opinion that pay need to go up, but that's just me. And again, I forgot, you know, I didn't introduce myself. I'm President Paul, NAACP president, and my education chair, and even more importantly, or equally as important, second vice president John Cox is with us today. And John, you can elaborate your thoughts on that.
Well, you know, I understand that the job is a tough job. There's a lot of content mastery that has to happen. And because of the type of content mastery that's necessary on such broad subjects, it takes a while to get up to speed. And so definitely, I don't, you know, if you're having a full-time job, that's going to be difficult. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm not for doing anything that's going to lower their pay or anything like that. Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn if you actually are intentional about doing this work. There's a lot to learn, and a lot of grace needs to be given. However, you shouldn't act like a subject matter expert if you're not going to do the work. So, but I'll leave that there because I understand that there's a learning curve. But if you've been around for a while, there's some things you should understand and some basic things that you should know.
Okay. All right. So we're going to cover this next video out of District 2 as well about EL. So let me share screen and go back to where we were.
This is still relatively new for us. And, you know, I think we've seen some pockets of where there's high levels of success that I think are directly correlated to high levels of fidelity of implementation. We've seen spaces where perhaps there's opportunities for growth, often in schools and in grade levels where perhaps there was a slower rollout. One thing we have to do, you know, I do think there are things that we need to stop doing, but I think sometimes our expectations are so high. I don't think sometimes we give things a chance first. Let's get better at it first, and then make those types of determinations and pivots along the way.
All right, so that was on the district and EL education. John, do you want to talk about that a little bit? And I think I may have skipped over some of that.
So when it comes to English learners, people who don't speak English as their primary language, the district has a lot of difficulty. Some of this difficulty, I'll go into detail a little later, but some of this difficulty is based on not having any direction, not having a unified direction, and having an abundance of resources without having those resources streamlined and efficiently focused. I really don't know how to say it, but there's the difference between teaching an English learner and another student, given in their content areas, like given in the math class or a science class or something like that. The difference is allowing them to speak in class, allowing them to show that they have a mastery of the language, or just to work out high order thinking in the classroom setting with rigor, right? So the main thing for EL learners in regular classes is them having an opportunity to speak. And, it's been clear that they have not been getting the opportunity to speak. He mentioned West Ed, and we'll get into that at Dr. Teresa's town hall, because I specifically was asking questions on that. So we'll delve into it there. But all over the district, the county is the same. EL learners don't really get a chance to speak enough to be able to practice using language at a high level. Anybody who's taken languages know that it's very easy to get these vocabulary words, to master the vocabulary words, but then being under pressure and having to respond in complete sentences about something, a high level topic, is really where you start to develop the expertise. And so they just need in classroom to have more opportunities to do that. And like I said, we'll get into it a little bit later.
Okay. And that was the only couple of questions that came out of District 2 that I found to be interesting. It wasn't a whole lot there. And like I said, and we'll talk about, how maybe some of the board meetings kind of differ from others. So we'll kind of dive into that. So hold on. Let me hit the next video. And now, so we'll move now to District 1, which was the next area board meeting. I was actually for that one live. So we will start there. And let me share screen. Let's get that up. And this is about CCRPI.
We answer that one. So Dr. Taylor, CCRPI measures how well schools prepare students for life after graduation. Can you briefly explain what the CCRPI is and what it measures? So the CCRPI, the College Career Readiness Performance Index, is a comprehensive look at school performance, right? So we're looking at things, content mastery, how well schools are closing gaps, how well we're preparing students for college and career readiness, how well we're addressing the various student groups in our schools, particularly those that are, the ML students, the SPED students, and the like. So there's a bunch of different measures that go into it. I'm assuming this question came out because we've just now gone back, and the state's gone back now retroactively and created the single score, the score. Richard Woods really wanted to prevent this idea of just labeling and reducing a school to a single point value, right? We're back in that space now, right? So now we do have grades, and if you will, for our schools. I think looking at looking at just the total doesn't give enough color commentary in terms of what might be actually happening in the school building. So for those that are really trying to assess how well we're doing that specific question, you may not be able to look at the subtotal and be able to determine that. I would suggest that if you're really trying to see how well a school is preparing students for after graduation, you go look at, the segment that looks at graduation rate, that looks at college and career readiness, that index, and dig in, not just get lost in that single score.
All right. John, you want to comment on that?
Yes. So this is important, right? The College Career Readiness Performance Index is the measurement for how well your kid is prepared for post-secondary, either college or career, but for post-secondary endeavors. It's much like it's much the same as the K through 3 literacy performance indicator. How well a child reads by the third grade is an indicator of some possible outcomes, and they're usually spot on. The College Career Readiness Performance Index is about the same. It's spot on, and the higher your readiness index number is, the better you will be able to perform across a number of different measures. So let me just give you some background on why this is important, especially when it comes to Georgia. In the early 2010s, Georgia, like several other states, came under scrutiny because the state assessment results painted a much rosier picture of student proficiency than national benchmarks, like the National Assessment of Educational Progress, right? An example would be a student might be labeled proficient in the 8th grade reading on the what was then the Georgia CRCT. So this is before there was the CCRPI. If you remember back then, like I said, it was the Georgia CRCT that all the kids were taking. So it would show that they were proficient in 8th grade reading on the Georgia CRCT, but on the NAEPS, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that national test, it would show that they were below basic. So there was a large gap, So the NAEP is known for rigorous proficiency standards. Georgia's old CRCT test had lower proficient cut scores. So meaning it was their score to get into the proficiency range was much lower. So more kids qualified as proficient than they actually were, right? So that created an honesty gap. Around the country, people was looking at Georgia like, they fudging the numbers. So it was an honesty gap. So Georgia had to do something about that in order for its numbers to be respected. And so they moved to the Georgia Milestone Assessment, and they aligned that closely more with college and career readiness benchmarks. They raised the higher proficiency standard. They open-ended constructed response items. So in other words, on the test, instead of just a lot of, ABCD type questions, you had open-ended questions that caused you to have to think. There were norm referencing, items and better alignment with the Common Core expectations. So basically, they got in line with what the national standards were. And when they did that, that means that their proficiency rating dropped dramatically because now they were being held to the same standard as everybody else. And where their lower proficiency cut range was, and now let's move to the norm, all those kids who used to qualify as proficient weren't qualifying as proficient anymore. But as a result of that, they started teaching more intentionally towards the national standards, and eventually got raised. There was a graphic that we could show, but
yeah, I can show it. You want me to? It's the pie chart.
No, it's the one where the big drop is. That it should be labeled as an honesty gap.
Okay, hold on. I can see if I get that to share. 1 second. Image.
So while you're doing that, I'll just keep going. So what happened is Georgia raised the bar for what they constitute as proficient. And by raising the bar, by raising the expectations, the teaching and all that other stuff correlated, and kids began to start meeting it because now the bar was raised and people wanted to meet the bar. So raising the expectations seemed to do the trick. And they got along in line with what the national ratings were. So they adopted CCRPI in 2012. And this, they created it actually for Georgia in 2012. So by 2016, reports from organizations like Achieve.org and other watchdog organizations said that Georgia had significantly closed the honesty gap, meaning they started to come in line and their measurements started matching up like it's supposed to. So no longer were these things inflated. And now, you can see that kids, if they say that they're supposed to be prepared at a certain level, those numbers are matching the national norms, and their performance is indicating that as well. And the tests are aligning with the national test. So the performances are starting to meet. So that's why, it's important, is because there seems to be a tendency to move towards, that's it. That's the gap. So you can see on here where they were up high in terms of proficiency, but they were actually really way down here. But the reported gap, that reported proficiency rating was up here, up above 80. And they were really much lower. And as they got in line with the way normal testing is done or assessments were done, then you start to see, they were still doing very well, but, it's more in line with what the expectations were. Well, I shouldn't say they were doing very well, but they were more in line with what the expectation was or what the national norm was. And as you can see. So CCPI, let me just explain what that is, right? When Georgia created this college and career readiness performance indicator, they focused on content mastery. And that content mastery is basically milestones assessments. And those milestones assessments, like I said, are patterned after, national standards. They focused on progress, which is academic growth year over year, but not just academic growth year over year. It's academic growth based on where you were last year within your peers. So let's say, for instance, you were at 73% mastery on a certain thing. And all the kids that were at 73% last year, that's your peer group. Now, next year, let's say they moved to 75, but you moved to 77. Then you made more progress than them. And so that's how they're managing, what your growth is. Peer to peer within your group, sort of apples to apples. So if you jump significantly, or you regress, or they pass you, then the question is, what happened with you? So they're monitoring your progress that way. When it comes to closing gaps, they're talking about closing gaps using equity outcomes among different student groups. So race, ethnicity, socioeconomics, how are you doing within the same area based on race and so forth. So part of CCRPI is to close gaps. And then the readiness part. This is the stuff where we're talking about, whether or not you take AP classes, IB classes, dual enrollment classes, and things like that. How well you do on these things. That's that's how well you would be for, how well you would do in college. And then they talk about graduation rate. So all of that makes up your CCRPI score. So, and that's from, 0 to 100, right? So it directly connects your academic rigor, instructional consistency, your equity, and real world student readiness, right? I'll give you an example.
Yeah, let's get this going.
What is the plan to improve discipline for the next school year to ensure students and staff are safe? There should be a focus on student accountability. I don't disagree, right? I don't think, as I mentioned, the whole either or, because what I hear in that is we're not doing accountability, right? That we're doing something else. So now we need to start adding accountability. Any discipline framework, or really anything, I think just about anything, it's applicable in so many different contexts. It has to be a both and. Yes, we need to be accountable. So that means you got to have rules. You have to have expectations. You have to have a willingness to hold students to a particular standard. But that doesn't mean you don't also need to have support. And It doesn't mean that you shouldn't teach expectations and not just assume that students know or they're getting, what they need from outside, right? It should be both. And, I feel like over these past couple of years, we're approaching more balance, which is where we need to live. We need to live in the space of balance, not on either ends of the continuum. Too much support does create, and I think lowers expectations, and you're going to see discipline maybe increase. Too much accountability, where it's just accountability, creates a very toxic environment, right? And so, we have a chance with kids. I would always tell parents, I loved to have, and one of the things I miss about like being in the building, I could spend hours trying to negotiate, like, because I have two daughters, girl fights. Like I felt like I was the master at getting, this group of girls that were best friends, but now they hate each other and they're antagonizing each other. I'll spend all day doing that type of work. It's when I had staff members who didn't like each other and I'm trying to be in the middle. That was a space that I wasn't really, I didn't enjoy that work. And with kids, we have a chance to teach, and that's our first priority. We have to teach them what we expect. We're going to hold them accountable, but we also have to be, we have to be in that space to be willing to teach. We have a pilot for interactive monitors here.
All right, so I'm gonna stop it there. So, John, you want to talk about where Gwinnett is in terms of the discipline policy? I think we talked about that pretty extensively.
Well, I think Gwinnett is in
discipline rates. I'm sorry.
Discipline rates. Well, I think from their numbers, going with their numbers, because that's what we have to go through. So far, this has been a pretty good year in terms of, not having the extremes, not having so many expulsions and so forth and so on. From the last number that I look at, there might have been a single expulsion for the year. At least I'm certain this one's going that way. And rightfully so. There's really no way to get around this. There's been a lot of intention around doing better about just what Dr. Taylor said, giving children the opportunity to learn the right behaviors. Everybody's household is different. What's acceptable in households are different. So when they come to school, there has to be a social norm, and some things have to be taught as to what's acceptable and not acceptable. And it's very difficult to blame a kid for something that they just didn't understand, never was taught and didn't have that expectation. So we have to set the expectations and set them up for success in terms of our idea of a portrait of a graduate and what that looks like, how civic, how civil, all of that. So some of it has to be, let's talk about why you did what you did and move to how you can, restore, that word that people hate, restorative justice, but that's necessary. And these learned behaviors. And so these interventions and things like that, teaching this stuff. The numbers look good in terms of, all the numbers are down, except for, the fighting in middle school, absenteeism is an issue as well. Vaping is an issue. So there are some targeted things that still have to be worked on. And that's going to take a bit for us to get there. But the progress this year is significantly better than last year. And far as I know, except for this one case that I think is coming up, and I say far as I know because discipline happens every day. So as far as I know, we haven't had anybody expelled and pushed to the gift schools, far as I know.
Okay.
So, but you can go not on your phone. You'll have to do it on your laptop or desktop computer to Gwinnett County's discipline dashboard, and you can see what those numbers look like. You can also double check those numbers through Georgia Department of Education. And I think what has happened is there's been a number of different trainings that have gone out, and some local school plans of improvement included new strategies when it came to discipline, and they've been acted now. So I think those things are moving in the right direction. And we'll just have to look at the numbers toward the end of the year. And then we'll look again in August when we're looking at those numbers. So the best times to look is in August and in January, and of course at the end of the year. January numbers tell you a lot, and in this January the numbers were phenomenal. So if you go back and look at that work session in January, and that's if you trust the numbers, then the numbers were phenomenal based on what it was previous year.
Okay.
And they did get a number of awards for PBI schools of distinction and schools being recognized for PBIS, which is planned behavior interventions. So the state has even recognized them for making these improvements. So.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to share the next video, and this is about the question was asked, what was the top priorities of a new superintendent? And I want to give a shout out to interim superintendent Al Taylor. I think he did a great job. I think you can see the content mastery in terms of that. I mean, even though he was supposed to be there really to go over the budget portion of the meeting, as you see in some of these videos, depending on the board member, he's kind of answering a lot of the questions. And doing a very great job and giving a lot of good detail and outline to some of the things being asked. So shout out to him.
Yeah, let me add to that. His breadth of knowledge is really good. You can see someone that's been engaged for a long time across multiple areas of GCPS, and that's why his knowledge is so deep. So yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. On to the next video, and this is on top priorities of the next superintendent.
So we talked about the SRO. All right, so Ms. Storm, Ms. Stone, what are your top 2 priorities for a new superintendent? Please be as specific as possible.
Thank you for the question. As Dr. Taylor mentioned earlier, the collective board, we are in the middle of conducting interviews for a search firm. So there were 9 applications from search firms from across the country who wanted to partner with the district to help us find our next leader. We narrowed that number down from 9 to 3. I actually engaged in an interview yesterday and one last week, and I have one more this week. And one of the things that is very important to me is stakeholder engagement. And it's actually one of the reasons why I eliminated the other 6 and went with the 3. So price point was important, but then also stakeholder engagement, because some of the other firms wanted to just simply send out a survey to stakeholders and say, hey, here's a link. Make your voice heard on what qualities you believe are in a new leader. What I want to see is more of a dialogue, forums, town halls. Are you speaking to students? Are you speaking to teachers? Are you speaking to parents, administrators? Are you speaking to business leaders? Because that's important as well. And the 3 firms, when I reviewed their applications, and one of the reasons why I recommended them is because all 3 of them have a plan to engage stakeholders at least 3 to 4 times in a dialogue manner, so a forum. And some of the firms actually, when they find 3 top candidates, they will invite the public. They have promised, they have a plan to invite the public to sit in on that interview. And for me, even though this is a board decision, I want the community's help, feedback, and support with this decision.
So I'm gonna pause it there. I don't think she really answered the question. You can, because the question was about what's her priorities for the next superintendent. The question wasn't about what her priorities are for the search firm. So I don't think we got a clear answer for what was being asked by whoever dropped that question in to her. So I guess I can write that down as a follow-up that I can have with next time our organization meet with Ms. Stone. And I guess at one of our general meetings, I can follow up with the answer. Because, yeah, you didn't really get an answer. She started talking about search firms and, you know, the search firm's ability to meet with the public. But that wasn't the question. The question, what were her top priorities for a superintendent? Because at the end of the day, search firm going to do what they do. They're going to, you know, give you a slate of candidates that they think are the best. It's ultimately the board's decision to decide who they want to hire. So, John,
but also, Ed, you know, you have to communicate to the search firm what you're looking for. So at some point, you have to have an understanding and be able to communicate what it is that what you're looking for.
Right.
And you would think if you don't know what you're looking for, you should know exactly what you don't, based on the action that you took just recently. You know, you should say, okay, well, you don't want this. You know, yeah, that was definitely a non-answer. And I don't know why that tends to happen a bit. And like I said, I understand that, you know, it's a lot of information, and Ms. Stone's, board member Stone's, on her behalf, you know, this is new, and this is a lot of information coming at once. But like I said, this is the thing. This is the thing that, you know, that the public wants to know about. And so you should be able to give a detailed description of what it is that you're looking for, especially at this stage. This happened in January, and you knew that the public was interested in that. And so you should be able to give, all of them should be able to give a succinct answer as to what they're looking for.
Yeah, I don't know if it was nerves because it was, you know, her being new. I don't know, but she definitely didn't answer that question because it wasn't about search firms. It was about her.
Yeah, and you couldn't have misheard it because it was on the screen.
Yeah, I guess so. But I'm just saying, could have been nerves and the spotlight and, you know, first time, you know, because I think if you look at the public forums, you know, and we may get into that toward the end, you know, like I said, between look at hers and let's just say a Dr. Simmons or Therese, they were, or Knutson, you know, they were more out front, they were more standing up, they were more engaging and answering the questions. Hers was a little bit more laid back and sitting down. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. this is observation. So I'm thinking maybe that was just nerves. I don't know. I may be wrong, but I'm giving her, I guess, you know, giving her some grace to say maybe that's what it was. But we'll, you know.
Now you give her quite a bit of grace because to me it looked like she just watched that one. She watched the whole town hall.
Yeah. So All right, so going to the next video. This one is on not responding to emails about Dr. Watts. So that's interesting. Okay, let's see what they're talking about. Oh, that's the wrong one. So let me stop.
The next question for you as well, I can start with this one because there's a legal part with this one. Ms. Stone, you stressed communication and transparency, but why did you not respond to constituents' emails about Dr. Watts' dismissal? There is a legal component in terms of what can be shared in with regards to personnel evaluations and the like. So there was some limitations that the board, and there's certain things that are discussed in executive session that are against the law, like literally against the law to share in public. But I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, and I want to remind people, while I am new to the board, I am not new to GCPS. For many of you all know, I taught here at Tequila High School from 2018 to 2023. And when I was elected in June, I had 6 months of time, which was not usual, because they moved school board races they made school board races nonpartisan, and the direct result of making it nonpartisan is that it pulls school board races off of the November ballot. So typically I would have been elected in November and started in January. But because school board races were made nonpartisan, it was moved to the May-June election. And so I had 6 months to what I did. I conducted a cross-district tour. There are 29 schools in District 1. I was able to visit at least all of them in some capacity and conduct substantive new board member training from the local level. And I appreciate the district supporting me in that effort. Me and my other colleague, Mr. Gasper, who's also a new board member, we conducted local training as well as state mandated training in conjunction with the Georgia School Boards Association and the Georgia Department of Education. I'm also a fellow with School Board Partners, fellow cohort 7, where I have opportunity to even learn more about my role. And there's this thing called the Open Meetings Act. And it's slightly separate from, if you look in the Georgia Code, there's a section for local boards of education and all of our roles. And then there's another section, I don't have the citation number handy, but it's around the Open Meetings Act. And our former superintendent, Dr. Watts, is a personnel matter. Like disciplinary hearings, so when a child is transferred to a tribunal hearing, those types of matters must be discussed in executive session. So if you've watched board meetings, executive session takes place after the working session. So our working session usually starts at 2, but we pushed it to 1:30. Our executive session is usually from 5 to 6 p.m. if we don't have a budget hearing or some other type of hearing. And in those meetings, we discuss personnel matters. And because of that code, the Open Meetings Act, I cannot discuss personnel matters. And transparency is very important to me. For those of you all who may follow me on social media, I try to update you all in real time. And I wish that I could provide additional information on the conversations around that matter. It's in the same way if a teacher separates from the district. That's a personnel matter that I cannot discuss because of the Open Meetings Act. The outcome of a student who is referred to a tribunal hearing, right? That is a board decision, collective board decision, whether that kid is permanently expelled, which I can't talk about facts, so whether the kid is permanently expelled or sent to give or whatever, those discussions are held in executive session and is under the Open Meetings Act. We aren't allowed to discuss it in the public. And for me, I've been trying to find ways to creatively navigate it. I've actually been getting into some trouble, which I think is good trouble. Some people tell me I'm too transparent, but.
Okay, I'm gonna stop it right there just because, and this is, once again, I'm not saying this to beat her up, because Board Member Stone has said a lot of the same things I've heard, Dr. Morgan say about the Opens Meeting Act. Can't recall if Simmons has said it. I know she's usually more careful with her words. First of all, before I talk about it, let me share screen on the Opens Meeting Act, because when we was putting together this podcast today to do a recap, since she brought it up, and I've heard Dr. Morgan bring it up, Dr. Therese Morgan bring it up before. I've heard not Dr. Stone, but Board Member Stone bring it up before, and I was like, let me look into this, because, and maybe as an organization we should have looked it up at the time, but we didn't. But we should have, so, we'll take responsibility for not doing it. So here's the code that she's referring to about being able to talk about what occurs in executive session. The one I want to highlight is code 50-14-3, which has an exclusion in there. So if you go to section 2 of this code, it says meetings when discussing or deliberating upon the appointment, employment, compensation, hiring, disciplinary action or dismissal, or periodic evaluation or rating of a public officer or employee, or interviewing applicants for the position of the executive head of an agency. Agency could be a school board, a school district. This exception shall not apply to the receipt of evidence or when hearing arguments on personnel matters, including whether to impose disciplinary action or dismiss a public officer or employee, or when considering or discussing matters of policy regarding employment or hiring practices of the agency. So let's pause right there. Basically, in layman's terms, what this is saying is, yes, the board has the right, and I'm going to stop sharing, to go into executive session about the discussion or removal of a superintendent. But if there's evidence, if there's a personnel matter that is going to involve the termination or removal of the superintendent, there should have been an open meeting where that discussion takes place. So basically what I'm trying to say is, based on the Opens Meeting Act, they may have violated this act by not having an open meeting where there was actually open discussion on the removal of superintendents' wives. So nothing in that particular act excludes them from having an open discussion on why he was removed, and they didn't have that. They do have the right to go in an executive session. Now, one thing I know she brought up was comparing it to a student. Can't compare it to a student, two totally different situations, two totally different things. Another thing she brought up was comparing it to a teacher, and I'm going to pull up the act that the teacher's under, because that is a separate deal than a superintendent. And if you'll bear with me a moment, I will pull up the one on the teachers, because the teachers are governed by something totally different. So my notes here. The procedures for terminating a teacher are governed by the Georgia Fair Dismissal Act. This is code OCGA code 20-2-940. This provides specific due process, including a written notice, charges, a hearing, and opportunity to present evidence. Now, while superintendents have similar contractual protections, their terminations procedure may differ based on the individual contract and local board policies. Now, it was in April 2022, just looking at my notes here, the Department of Board of Education in DeKalb County terminated former Superintendent Cheryl Harris during a special call meeting. Reports indicated that during this meeting, she may not have been properly provided notice of the meeting, and that also violated the Opens Meeting Act. Additionally, the superintendent was reportedly removed from the virtual meeting for being informed of her termination. So again, the Open Meeting Act, if you're terminating a superintendent due to personnel matters, if the superintendent is presenting a defense of his termination, that all should have been in the open meeting for the public to hear, see, and present the facts. Again, that's Code 50-14-3. So you all can go online and pull that information up from the, let's see, I can give you the direct website to go to get that information.
So basically, while you're doing that, how it reads is if you want to have a discussion as to whether or not he should be removed, you guys can do that in executive session and keep it behind closed doors, especially if they don't plan on acting. The minute that they plan on acting, then they have to present that discussion about how they got there and give him an opportunity to defend himself publicly. So it gives them a space to have a conversation amongst themselves about that and discuss some things, so long as they're not taking any steps towards dismissal or anything like that. But if they're going to do that, then that discussion has to be a public discussion. And that didn't happen. Also, what we have been speaking on for the longest is that, that any long-term, any change to the long-term strategic plan was supposed to have public input as well. So that means if you're going to fire the superintendent, then at the same time and change directions, then that also should have had public input before it was done. But I'll agree with Ed, that there were a lot of things to consider because of the way this thing played out as to how much we exposed because of what kind of consequences it could have led to for the children. I think our thinking was we don't want the kids to lose their accreditation and have their high school diplomas mean nothing. We said that publicly a few times as we tried to have conversations behind the doors not to move in that direction. And then even after, trying to make sure that we didn't ignite a fire keg at the expense of the children. So that was something we were trying to be cognitive about and find another way to proceed that was less destructive. But
yeah, and again, like I said, to go back to what I said earlier, in the website, you can go to the Georgia Attorney General's website that has all the different code violations that you can look up in terms of state law, or you can just type in Opens Meeting Act Georgia and Google that, and Justia should come up where you can, read the law for yourself. Again, if somebody were to tell me I'm wrong or reach out to me, and I will run it past some fellow attorneys that we have, I'm more than happy to, retract what I'm saying. But it looks like the board may have violated the act by not allowing, having an open meeting to discuss, the termination publicly. That's not to say they violated anything by being in an executive session, but one thing that has come up consistently, I don't hear it much from Dr. Simmons, but from Dr. Morgan and Board Member Stone, is it's a personnel matter. That's why we can't discuss it. The Open Meetings Act clearly states if it is a personnel matter, then that it is going to involve the dismissal or suspension of a public officer, which in this case, Superintendent Watts does qualify for that because his contract you can do open records on his contract and have access to look at what's in his contract since he's a public official, a public officer, a former public officer at this point. Yeah, that all that goes out the window, and because of that, the act was pretty much designed for transparency, and not to hide behind an executive session on decisions to make change about the superintendent. Again, this is new. We just learned about this in real time. I read this act last night. Didn't read it at the time that it was first said, but I've heard it enough times and at school board meetings after this 3-2 decision was made, and said, "Hey, let me go read this and see what they're talking about and what in this law says that they can't do that." Under the assumption that maybe this is something our organization needs to do to make sure boards are being transparent, that they are having open meetings before they make decisions like this to remove a superintendent, because it costs school districts like ours so much money to not only fire a superintendent but hire a search firm and then put another superintendent on the contract. And it caused so much dysfunction within school districts, constantly changing out the superintendent. After reading that act is pretty much there to create that transparency that I was going to initially talk with elected officials about, putting something in place to prevent that. That's what the Open Meetings Act does. So if I'm wrong on that, y'all got our number, you got our email address. You can definitely email us and tell me that. But otherwise, based on how I'm reading that clause in the Open Meeting Act, GCPS may have violated that act by making this decision and not having an open meeting to have that discussion. So with that being said, because of time, and we don't want this to run too long, we're going to move on to District 5, which is Dr. Morgan's district. And I think one of the first things that came out of her meeting was how confident she is going to be in hiring a new superintendent. So let's pull that up.
Sure that each and every child knows that they belong and they have what they need to not just survive, but to thrive in our school system.
Yes, you got that next one.
Let's go with the Dr. Morgan. How confident are you? Let's go with that. Hey, can I just share, y'all? I'm straight up. If any of y'all know me, truth and transparency. I don't shy away from being honest around answering these questions and ask me the hard questions. I'll tell you the truth. I have no issue with that. So I welcome the challenging questions. I don't run away from accountability. I welcome that truth. I always stand with courage and integrity, and I will so. In any case, I'm very consistent with that. So to answer this question, how confident are you in hiring a strong superintendent, given you've been part of removing 2 successful ones in just a few years? So I'm going to say this. So just so you all know that the average tenure of superintendents around the nation is about 3 to 5 years. Mr. Wilbanks was here, and in fact, he made history as one of the longest running school superintendents in the nation. That is very, very rare. At the time, our school system is changing, it has evolved, and it was time for us to make a change at that time from a superintendent who was there for a really long time, recognize the work of Mr. Wilbanks, and we also recognize that it was time for us to make a change. The second superintendent that I was part of the process of selecting and advocating for and believed in, and now we made a decision as a board, not just one person, but it takes the majority of the board to make a decision around removing the superintendent. And we made that decision. We have a new vision that we are moving forward on, ensuring that we have someone who can lead our school system and ensuring that everyone has what they need to be successful. I also say that having been part of the process of looking for a new superintendent, there have been some lessons learned, and we are incorporating some of those lessons from what we learned. And like I said, that's engaging our community. It's due diligence. It's really looking at is interviewing search firms as part of that process as well, and really being intentional around how we do that and taking our time to do that. So I know some people are saying when and how quickly can we find a superintendent? We're not in a rush. We want to get it right. And I think that's important. And that's one of the things that, as the vice chair of the board and as one of 5 board members, I will champion for. I also want to be clear about I'm only one. I can't do anything with just one person on the board. It has to be the majority of the board. It takes at least 3, but of course we always look for the opportunity to have 5 board members supporting decisions, and it's not always like that. And just because all 5 board members don't vote the same way, it doesn't mean that there is dysfunction. It is the process of diversity, the process of different opinions, perspectives, different backgrounds, and different values. But we do stand clear that all of us are committed to making sure that we make this decision that benefits our school system.
All right, so just want to touch on something. Again, I don't think, given where the United States ranks globally in terms of education, we should be using their 3 to 5 year model as an example, a standard that any school, forget GCPS, DeKalb, Fulton, any school system shouldn't be using a 3 to 5 year model for superintendents. Why? Because, I mean, you give me an organization that changes leadership every 3 years, that's successful. Your most successful organizations are going to be the ones with stability. Now, are there times when, after 8 years, 10 years, leadership may change because maybe the style or the person's not adapting to whatever the needs or things are at that time? Of course. But if you're an organization that's changing leadership every 3 years, 3 to 4 years or 3 to 5 years, I think was the average, you're not going to be a very successful organization. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Again, the superintendent is like the CEO of a company. The best companies typically going to have a CEO that's there for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, sometimes 15, 20, 30 years. Any company that's changing CEOs every 2 to 3 years or 3 to 4 years is probably a company that's in chaos, because if they're having to keep changing them, that means that company's not being successful. And that doesn't apply only in the business world. I mean, in the nonprofit world, with what we do, if we're changing presidents every couple of years, I'm pretty sure you can probably look at, how well we're doing or whether we're having an actual impact as far as the organizations, if we keep changing the person that's supposed to be leading the organization. Because at the end of the day, superintendents, presidents, CEOs, they set the vision of how things are going to flow, because they run the day-to-day operations of that particular organization or entity. And if you're changing it every 3 years, then you're not going to have a successful project. And that's really all I got to say about, that particular comment. John, if you got anything, you can weigh in.
No, I don't think it really addressed anything for me.
Yeah, because I still didn't really hear the confidence and the ability to hire a good superintendent. I heard the attack on the reason why to remove, but as far as what's going to give Dr. Morgan confidence that they're going to be able to fulfill the position, I didn't really flesh that out. I just heard why they got rid of him. So I think one of the things we had in there was, I think somebody put a question in there, and I'm going to skip over that, about repaying the money back for the removal of Watts. Once again, we've already talked about that ad nauseum. I think they say removing Watts and removing Will Banks, making the board repay. Again, they don't make, it ain't no money worth repaying. So, yeah, I mean, I think we talked ad nauseum how the board, paying money back is just a silly thing to get into. And like I said, the board don't make enough money to even go down that road. So the next video, we'll just skip to the CCP, PRI and the EL exit rate, the next 2 clips. So I'm just going to share screen and play those now. And if anything we got left we need to add from that, we can do so.
Mm.
Is Georgia's official college and career readiness metric. Why hasn't improving every school's CCRPI to 75 plus been made a district priority?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair question. So the CCRPI single score just came back. So one of the, when one of the focus areas for Richard Woods, the state superintendent, was that we not use a single score. He felt like it doesn't tell the full story about, what's happening in terms of progress in the school. The single score came back as a result of the Georgia Promise List. So this is a retroactive calculation. The part that I might kind of push back a little bit, there has been a use of CCRPI to identify areas for improvement, and you'll see that kind of feathered in the local school plan for improvement. So before, we weren't necessarily using the CCRPI because we didn't have that single score that was ranking schools. When that score went away, the various categories of, the content mastery, the closing gaps, that's great data to inform where progress is made. Now that the single score is back, it is a part of thinking about school improvement. We haven't had that for the past couple of years, though. So there wasn't like a single metric from the CRPI that was produced that says that this is the overall grade, if you will, for the school. But that's absolutely something, what you just pointed out, is absolutely something that needs to be a focus area, and it is part of our school planning and improvement process now.
Yes, sorry, Dr. Reese, this is the question I have for you. What is the current English learner exit rate in the district, and how does it compare to state expectations? Secondly, what are you doing to ensure that more students reach proficiency and exit EL status successfully?
What I don't have that number right here off the top of my head. What I will say is one of our biggest growth areas as a district, in full transparency, is ML support, right? That there is a significantly growing population in our district that deserves and needs the support. We have really been working hard, our ML office has been working hard to strategize around what best practices are going to look like. We just conducted a full study from an outside agency to kind of provide us best practice recommendations. And we are in the space now of creating a very robust plan to address just what you're talking about, to make sure that we do accelerate the growth of our ML students and that we are supporting and meeting the needs that are very apparent, not just in this particular district. This isn't something obviously there may be a higher concentration here, but ML supports touch every corner of our district. And that West Ed study, I think, illuminated a lot of areas for opportunities, and we're going to be unveiling a pretty robust plan moving forward.
And I also want to encourage, thank you, Dr. Taylor. I think for the operational answer, that was great. And just from a board perspective, because you addressed me also as a board member. And I've been, of course, visiting our international.
Let's pause here.
Center, speaking with.
All right.
So there was a lot being said, and I think we'll get to the address Dr. Teresa's comment a little later. But when it comes to CCRPI, and I know that's a mouthful to say, and there's a lot, so I'm going to try and just ask you guys to look it up, do some research on it, because it is how your schools are scored. So if you're interested in knowing how well your school is preparing your child for the next level, please look up that number and make sure you're familiar with it, measures, and so forth and so on. So I'll just say that there. The problem is grade inflation and misalignment. An A at a high-performing school with a CCRPI of 90 often reflects rigorous instruction, while an A at a low-performing school with a CCRPI of 60 may not represent equivalent mastery. So this undermines college readiness and equity especially for economically disadvantaged or marginalized students. It creates false impressions for parents, scholarship committees, employers, and colleges. The next thing we asked about the exit rate, EL exit rate. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands what that is. Because there's been so much talk about multi-language learners, there is some basic things that happen with people who for English is not their primary language. When they come into the school system, they take ESOL, and they are supposed to test out of it. And how they test out, and that would is rated, right? There's so let's say 21% of Gwinnett is English learners. And so every year, the number of kids that test out or matriculate out of that category is rated. So the current EL exit rate is 9%. Right? So 9% of those who are in it are testing out on a yearly basis. And so we have to do better with that.
Where should they be at?
Well, that's kind of hard to say because there aren't very many counties that do much better than that.
Okay.
So when you go to the Georgia Department of Education and you look for an EL exit rate, you're going to find all those numbers somewhere around 9.
Okay.
No one's doing well with that, but that's nationwide. A lot of that has to do with the fact that there's a disconnect in how services are being rendered, but we'll talk about that in the next segment. And I don't want to take up too much time. I'm just saying that if you're intentional about multi-language learners, one thing that you should know is the process for how we gauge the progress of multi-language learners. You know, what system they run through and how they exit out of it. We want them exiting out, as Dr. Taylor said, we want them exiting out as soon as possible so that they can join the regular population and not be there. And then we want them to do that well before graduation as well. Because when they move out of the English learner distinction, they still are monitored for 2 years to monitor that progress. So we definitely want to deal with that. But there's not a lot different from English learners than there are for multicultural learners. The difference in working with an EL learner versus other learners is the intentional, well, as they like to say, intentionality around growing their voices and them being able to speak. And I'll get into that, like I said, when I do a little evaluation of what the West Ed people, what their recommendations were, since they're the subject matter expert on multilanguage learners.
All right, and I'm gonna let Dr. Teresa. It looked like that was you asking the question at that particular board meeting. We was at a District 5, and we're at District 5 board meeting with Dr. Teresa Morgan. So I'm gonna let her give her response to your question that you asked at that meeting live about. I think you asked her, did she know the EL exit rate? But we'll just listen for her answer.
Mm-hmm.
Families and students, our school staff administration as well, and trying to understand their needs and understand how we can invest as a board in supporting the needs of our students. And so from a budgetary perspective, which we have control over, from a policy perspective, which we have control over, those are two things that we can do, as well as looking for a superintendent who also is very consciously aware of addressing the needs of this historically marginalized group. So that is something that we are looking at from a board perspective, and with the power that we have to be able to address the needs of our multilingual learners, but also understanding that there are intersectional needs that we have to address, and that includes addressing the special needs as well as our attendance and the root causes of attendance, as well as looking at flexibilities around how we can address their needs if they're in high school or they're working, and knowing that these families care about their students, and sometimes just because they aren't here in the room, it doesn't mean that they don't care, and it's being really requires us to be really intentional about just because they're not here, it doesn't mean they don't care. And just because they're not here, it doesn't mean that we don't do something about it. So we recognize with the data, that the data is showing us that we have to address the needs of our multilingual learners, from graduation rates, from attendance rates. When we look at discipline, we look at early literacy, we look at math test scores, we look at reading literacy. We have some gaps, and we are committed to addressing those gaps.
Yeah,
I
thank you,
appreciate
Doc.
that question.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Trees. I was just interested in the exit rate because that's on the fundamental level is how you assess whether or not the kids who are learning English as a second language, what their progress is. And the state uses that metric to graduate them out of English as a second language. So once they reach a certain proficiency, and then after they graduate out, they monitor from 2 years to make sure that they're still ready. So I was wondering, how are you using that program, and if we are pushing that particular effort to make sure that we get our multilingual learners where they need to be before they graduate, and so that they don't be frustrated and drop out early.
Right. No, it's a very fair question. And I don't want to say the wrong number. I think I know, but I don't want to give you the wrong number. But fundamentally, what you're saying is 100% accurate. That the rate by which we're able to accelerate language acquisition is the rate by which we start to see, the needle move in terms of academic success for this group of students. And there is a very targeted effort to make sure that happens. Now, and this is not to, certainly not to cast aspersions against the state. This is not a bilingual education state. So there is some challenges that we have in terms of being able to really assess what a student knows, because, they're having to take this assessment in English only, right? And, there's this distinction between how much you know about the content and how much you know about the language. And it's hard for us to differentiate that right now. So that's where I think West Ed has really helped to close that gap and help our think differently about this by using best practices that exist across the country. And the recommendations that they laid forward, now there's some that aren't going to be immediate. And, I wouldn't even overpromise and say we're going to be able to roll out that full platform. But there's some very basic things that we can do as soon as we get back from, in August, that I think will absolutely start to make a difference in what that success rate looks like and what that EL exit rate. I would never try to avoid and not give you the number. If I had it off the top of my head, I'd give it to you, but I don't want to give you something that's incorrect. But I'm going to commit that full answer will be outlined, on the when we compile all the questions that were submitted.
No, I appreciate it. And the last thing I wanted to say is in your district, there are...
All right, I'm gonna stop it there. Any final comments on that before we move on to Gasper District 3?
Yeah. So that wasn't a gotcha question, right? The exit rate question wasn't a gotcha question. Most ESOL teachers, who do this work, understand that that's basic for them. What they're trying to do there is to get them to be able to speak at a level of proficiency that this is no longer a problem for them. So it's an urgent thing. And if you are someone who is championing ML, multilanguage learners, then you should definitely know that process and know the number that we are currently operating at, because it is low, very low. And they hired the West Ed firm to come in, subject matter experts on English learners, and they gave an evaluation in the March work session. So if you go watch that, you'll see, and I'll just summarize some of their findings. The WestEd evaluation revealed a concerning gap between teachers' perceptions of their instruction and the observed reality. In other words, 75% of teachers reported that they regularly promoted higher order thinking and connections across ideas. This is the type of thing that helps English learners display content, show content mastery as well as mastery of the language. This is what they say is necessary for English learners to practice on a regular basis. And the teachers were reporting that they're doing this 75% of the time, yet WestEd only observed it 38 to 48% of the time. Students voiced that they were able to speak in classes very limited. So many students stated that mostly they listen and they rarely participate in discussion, minimizing the ability to articulate complex ideas. And that's a key skill for content mastery and future success despite significant investments. So WestEd said, hey, look, you have a robust professional learning infrastructure. You have 6 models, 6 programs for how to teach English EL students. And at some schools, there are 6 models in place. So you have all of this abundance. You are training ESL or endorsing ESOL certificates for teachers at the rate of 60 to 90 teachers a year. So you have abundance of people doing this work. You have abundance of programs and abundance of resources being thrown at this. But where the rubber meets the road, in the classroom where the children are actually supposed to be speaking and the teachers are supposed to be implementing the training, it's not actually happening. It's being reported as happening, but it's not happening. So that's the problem. They say there's no reason to create any more programs. In fact, they say the problem is a clear unified instructional strategy is what's necessary. Fewer targeted programs are necessary. So, reduce the number of programs that you have available so that teachers can collaborate, within the same school, and they can work along with content teachers and share ideas on how to effectively engage EL learners. So sort of force multiply. Their solutions is, implement a rigorous unified instructional framework, develop and communicate district-wide framework that defines high quality instruction for all students. Academic rigor, they say less rote memorization, because that's what they observed, instead of critical thinking and comments and the kids being asked to speak and to use the English language to expose their content mastery. Instead, they were just dealing with rote memory.
You said this was information from a work session?
Yeah, WestEd, they hired this firm to tell them what they're doing wrong.
Which work session? Do you know what month?
This is the March. This is the March work session.
For those who want to watch, you can go to GCPS board meetings, or you can just download the GCPS TV app, go to the March work session. And from the firm that on WestEd, they gave this information that John just mentioned.
And lastly, what they also said was, you don't teach English learners much different than you teach other students. You have to engage them the same way. The thing is, recognizing them in your, let's say if you're in the science class, recognizing that you have an English learner in your science class, and then engaging that student so that they speak, giving them opportunities to speak. It's the same thing for multicultural learners, right? Relative content, that's going to engage them, and then the opportunity to have these discussions, and being intentional about that. So they said no more, don't spend any more money on new programs. spend the money on coaches for teachers, embed these coaches in the classroom to make sure that what's being said is happening, and that the teachers are, because, we had a conversation with Dr. Taylor, and Dr. Taylor, we all agree that, some of the stuff might not be intentional. A teacher might not know, that what she thinks she thinks they're doing isn't really happening, right? Or these opportunities aren't really happening. They might not notice it, but when they interviewed the kids in these 89 classes that they sat in on across the district, the kids were saying we don't get an opportunity to speak in class. We're only memorizing the information being given, and that's problematic because that's not how you develop critical thinkers. So,
All right. So we're running a little bit short on time, so we're gonna go a little bit quicker with our responses, me included. So I'm gonna cut through a couple of things, but let me go to Gasper now. We on District 3, Board Member Steve Gasper. So let me jump to his thing where he was asked to give his qualities he's looking for in the next board member. So let me share screen on that one.
So me personally, and I'm not going to really speak too much on behalf of the board as a whole because they all have their own thoughts and opinions. But for me, the qualities that I'm looking for is someone that puts our students and teachers first, and someone that is focused on student achievement. And that's it. I don't want someone that's focused on politics. I don't want someone that has a political agenda, someone that is being fed information from a large national political arm or juggernaut that's out there. I want someone that's personal, someone that listens to the needs of our students and our staff and is solely focused, extremely focused on student achievement, because that is where we're going to show the best success. And that again, that's me speaking, Steve. I'm not speaking on behalf of the board. I know the other board members may have a similar response to that question, but that is most important to me.
All right, so I really don't have a whole lot to say. I think that's fair, having somebody that's gonna listen to what the needs and concerns are of the district and things like that, and it's gonna, govern the district based off what's in the best interest of the students. I think that was kind of a political answer to give, but John, any comments?
Yeah, I think he answered the question. At least he attempted to answer the question.
Yeah,
we may not like, all of his answer, but a lot of what he said makes perfect sense. Where there might be a little bit more depth added to that is that, we would, if I were answering that question, I would say we need somebody who understands the unique situation that Gwinnett has. We have over 30,000 multi-language learners, right? And that number is growing all the time. So even though I talked about that exit rate being 9, right? You can compare that to if you go on the Georgia Department of Education and you look at the exit rates, you'll look at someone who only has 6,000 multi-language learners, and their exit rate is 6%. So, we have triple or more than some of the other counties, and we're doing as well as anybody. Can we do much better? Yes, by being more intentional about servicing those kids and giving them opportunities to immerse themselves in language. I play with languages all the time, study multiple languages, and you can learn the words, like I said, rote memorization of words. But how to use them and use them at a high level only comes when you're answering questions in those pressure situations, dealing with content that's of a high level. So definitely in science class, definitely in math class, you should be doing that. Also, our county has a lot of economically disadvantaged schools where it's over 70 and 80% of the kids are on free and reduced lunch. That's a big problem. And that has its own set of services that are necessary that may not just be services that are, the school can meet, but it requires the community to come in and help with these wraparound services and provide that help. So yes, like I said, I don't want to take up a lot of time, but yes, you have to uniquely understand what's going on in our county. We have a lot of things that we do well. We have some things that have been neglected for a long time, and so Dr. Watts had put in some things to help fix those problems and to address them, but they've been kind of cut short or not fully executed. And that's what you saw with West Ed, and that's with a lot of programs. They got, when it comes to, literacy rates, they had a really good system, Wit and Wisdom. Not to cut, and I know you want to move on, but Wit and Wisdom was a very good system that would have been very good for Black and Latino kids because it allowed the teachers to be able to pull in content that would have been relevant to them, that would have been more engaging, but then they backed off that. So it seems like they pull the right programs and then just don't execute for whatever reason. I don't know.
Okay. All right. So moving it along. And like I said, for the second time, I'm going to cut through some of these videos. Some of this, we're not going to get to everything we wanted to get to just because of the time, but we're going to get to this last one from Board Member Gasper.
I'm going to put staff or schools in a position where they're doing something to violate state or federal regulations. To the best of our understanding and awareness, there's nothing that we're doing that excludes any students. And so we feel like we're in compliance. As state and federal regulations shift, we always depend heavily on the guidance from our state Board of Education. There are a number of these directives that are going to be tied up in the courts for a while. Right? They have to work through that process. There are injunctions that are in place, and it's stop and go and stop and go. So once we get guidance, we'll make whatever modifications are necessary, but we feel like we are actually in compliance with all laws at this point.
Okay. I thought Gasper may jump in on that one. At least I noted that he did and add some answers to that. Let me see.
Yeah, we'll do one. Yep.
All right. So maybe I'm just going to rewind it back just to see.
Anything that's exclusionary. Our interpretation.
Yeah, I would have loved to, maybe this was one that Dr. Taylor answered and Board Member Steve Gasper didn't. I would have loved to see him take that as a board member. Again, we know we have a hostile president that is anti-DEI, but it would have been good to see a board member say that, hey, we're going to make sure that, kind of what Dr. Taylor said, we're not excluding any students, regardless of race or color. So, yeah, the name of it may be gone, but the principle of making sure that every student has proper equity, whether it's, Black student, Asian student, Hispanic student, white student, all these students will make sure that they get the proper equity because we know there's a subset of our students that have not been served. I would have loved to see Gasper kind of speak on that. I hate that he let Dr. Taylor take that and then give it.
That was a good topic.
Definitely. Moving on, we're going to go to the final district, which is District 4, Dr. Adrian Simmons. And we won't get out to all the videos we wanted to discuss, but I guess we get to this one because this was similar to the one that was asked to Rachel about her top priorities for the next superintendent. And let's just get her response on that.
So, top 3 priorities for District 4. One of the reasons that I ran for school board is, as I've shared, I have a son and a daughter in the school district. And I've had wonderful experiences at Arcado working with the school council, and just want to elevate that collaboration even more between district staff and community, between district and parents, district and community partners. I believe that most of our issues, because they occur, all of our schools are different, they have their own little complexities. I believe that the people that experience those issues are typically the ones that have good ideas on how to address them. And so one of the priorities that I have is to continue to advocate that our district interact with our parents and our partners, our community partners, on a regular basis to ensure that we are in tune with what those needs are and actually soliciting from them what could be some of the possible solutions. Yes, we have experts at the district level, but making sure that we're hearing from the community around how to solution to better meet the needs of students and families. Secondly, as I mentioned, academic achievement. That's what we're all about as a school system. We need our students to be prepared for life, to be prepared for careers, to be prepared to contribute to society. For me, a lot of that is rooted in making sure our students know how to read. We have 38% of students from historically underserved communities that are reading below grade level. 38%. Now, if you want to know the future, if you want an idea of where we're headed in terms of workforce, graduation, you look at your third grade reading scores. That's a problem. And so that is something that I am looking for us to be able to address, and that you'll see in our working sessions. That is something that we actively measure whenever we can get data points to show that we are moving the needle there. One of the, I guess the last priority is going to be around equity. Our experiences in District 4 comparable, our facilities in District 4 comparable to that of other districts. There should be no difference. I shouldn't have to move to another district to have a better experience. As a teacher, I shouldn't want to leave a District 4 school after my 3 years to go to another district. So I am very passionate about leveraging our comparability, having a high expectations across the board, not just for one district in GCPS, but for all of our districts.
Okay, I'm gonna pause it there. John, you wanna, before I go?
Yeah. First of all, Dr. Simmons' growth from the first time that she started to now is a pleasure to watch, because although I disagree totally with the decision with Dr. Watts, you can tell that she's engaged and she's doing work. She's reading, she's learning and doing all the things that she should be doing to show her understanding of what's going on in her district and in the county. So yes, her district has been really neglected, very neglected, and faces some serious challenges. But she has 3 high schools, 3 clusters in the district. Brookwood is doing fairly well. And I think the other one is Parkview is not so bad either. It's just Shiloh in an area that really is struggling. So with a very focused effort on Shiloh, that's where we wanted to do our late bus project. And I don't know what happened there, but we were intentional about that because we saw some opportunities to make some headway there. So if, If there are some very specific things done in the Shiloh area, and at the same time, working to move the other two clusters, continue them moving in the right direction, would be fine. However, gimmicky things is what I find problematic. And what I mean by gimmicky things is, we watch both Shiloh and I want to say South Gwinnett receive some sort of AP honors. And if you get an AP honor for 20%, let's say 20% of your kids taking at least one AP exam, but only 11% of those 20% pass, I don't know that that's something that we should be given honors for. Maybe recognizing that we're moving in the right direction, but an award, no, because we're not there yet. And also my question would be, have you prepared the kids well enough for them to take the exam if only 11% of the 20% that tried passed? Just to say that you get this AP distinction? No. Prepare the kids well so that more kids will want to take it because they're prepared to take it, and more people pass a higher success rate. I don't want things to be done on paper to get accolades if the kids aren't prepared for that, and so that worried me a little bit. Seeing that, I mean, we were at the business meeting that night together when we were like, yep. How is that possible? How do you make that jump? And then when you learn that only 11% out of 20, I don't know. So
I'll say this, at least in reference to Shiloh and Gwinnett, because I looked at the graduation rates. The last couple of years, they are moving in the right direction. So I think as far as the equity piece and some of the investments, Dr. Watts and his staff, previously, and the board as a whole has made the investments to improve the things in the district. Again, I know Simmons brought up things with literacy rates. I would love for her to dive more deeper into that, because I think you've mentioned before, if you're looking at literacy rates from during COVID, everybody's literacy rates were bad. I would want to do a deeper dive on, okay, what are the literacy rates in her district in 2023, 2024. So this particular school year, and it's from 2023 school year to now, are those numbers kind of moving in a upward trajectory where it's going in the right direction? I know she brought up some things about, wanting to, be transparent with the parents. Again, you're a leader, you're a board member. As chair, that wasn't done when the decision was made to remove the superintendent. There was no transparency. There was no public input. Again, we can't pick and choose when we want to have public input. If the public input is not going to fit our narrative, we don't want to have it. And then other situations we do want to have it. From my leaders, I want to see some consistency in that realm. We just can't pick and choose when we want to have transparency. Like I said, we're up against the clock. We got time for maybe one more.
Before we move on there, what I would say in the Shiloh area, because if someone's listening in the Shiloh area, why didn't you fight for wit and wisdom in your area? If literacy is your thing, and wit and wisdom is such a good program recognized around the country, specifically for having some sort of impact with Black and Hispanic students, why wouldn't you, when the pilot program was going on, why didn't you fight to keep wit and wisdom? So it's that kind of thing that I'm talking about. Having all these resources, getting the best programs and so forth and so on, then dropping the ball where the rubber meets the road. So these things exist. Where's the engagement? Also, if she's talking about, doing more things in the community, well, we're here. And then also, there's a center there that can be used for something like the Children's Defense Fund, who runs a program in the summertime that does really well with literacy, And then the Build the Brain, the BB Squared thing that is already here in Gwinnett County. How come that is not being pushed more? So like I said, there's a lot of things available. It's who's deciding to take, who's intentional about doing what they need to do to get their kids where they need to get. And you can see it. You know, there's a reason why is that way and North Gwinnett is that way and so forth and so on. It's because the leadership is intentional. Anyway.
Yeah, and it's the last one, and then we're going to close this out just for the sake of time because we're up against the clock. So I'm going to let this run.
She was very passionate in that conversation, and she stopped. And she was like, well, wait a minute. Don't ever confuse my passion with me being upset with you, right? That I care so much about this work. Sometimes, you know, you might hear it in my tone, you might hear it in inflection, but it's not, there's nothing about this that suggests that I don't believe that you're doing the right work. But I just care so much about the success of these kids that it's always going to land. Sometimes it's going to land on you in a much different way. And I appreciated that because, you know, I was a little teary-eyed on the phone and like, you know, like just the interim, but I'm gonna stand here and I'm gonna take it. But so I appreciate that because I'm pretty sure she heard in my voice that, well, let me back off a little bit and let me context it. But I appreciated that conversation. So.
Thank you for sharing your personal experience with me. I blame my parents. I'm sorry. If you come to my house for the holiday, you will hear all the passion around Uno. And we love each other dearly. It truly is the passion, and I'll take the feedback and continue to work on delivering in a more maybe less intense way. I do know that many of the staff members after the meetings, we huddle up and we hug sometimes, and we share reminders from the board to them that this is not personal. This is just us trying to get the information that's helpful and trying to make the information transparent to the community. So know that it is in an effort to make sure our stakeholders are informed and in an effort to make sure we're meeting the needs of each and every student. But I'll take
And I'm gonna stop there just because of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, again, the question was, why does it seem like they're upset every time they're talking to staff at these work sessions? I'm going to say that question was only directed to two board members, and that was Dr. Morgan and Dr. Simmons. It wasn't direct. I didn't hear that question come up to board member Stone, Gasper, or Knutson. I've watched those work sessions. I think I went back and watched maybe 6 months worth of work sessions, about maybe 4 to 6 months worth. And I can say for certain that, you know, it's a difference between passion and being rude and disrespectful. Some of those work sessions, the people are being cut off mid-sentence. And again, I'm a very passionate person depending on what the topic is, but I try to avoid being disrespectful and cutting people off. So, yeah, I'm going to disagree with Dr. Simmons and Interim Superintendent Taylor because, that's disrespect when you're cutting people off mid-sentence. And that's all I'm going to say.
I watched those sessions myself, and I agree with the majority of people. Well, I agree with the people who said it seems a little harsh. And you know, if you watch them, I think you'll come to that too sometimes. Sometimes when it's unnecessary, it comes out as coming out of left field, especially when the information that was given to you pretty much speaks for itself. You know, if you're upset, it doesn't reflect what you wanted to reflect, and that's another issue. And I agree with some of what they're asking for in terms of having these numbers disaggregated so that they can see what it is and get to the nitty gritty. Because you need the numbers to be able to persuade the people who don't believe that there's a problem. So you have to fish through those numbers to show the disparity in things. I think there's a way that you do that doesn't come off as if you're being condescending or belittling. Especially,
I just think it just boils down to how you talk to people. Period. I mean,
Yeah,
between being passionate and
passion, yeah, I agree with you there too. Passion is one thing, and the ability to communicate your passions in an effective way that doesn't alienate the people that you're asking services for is also a skill. It's a skill that we're actually supposed to be teaching as well, right? And that's it. So if you look at the overall, what we've been saying today is that when it comes down to communicating effectively or allowing people to speak or whatever, where the rubber meets the road is not where we're having a whole lot of success. And where we do have that success, it has to do with, hopefully what people are doing in their homes outside of it, because it doesn't seem like no matter what level you are on in terms of education, that kids are having a whole lot of opportunity to exchange ideas. And that's what has to happen.
Yeah, and then my closing remarks, because we got to wrap things up. I got to head out of here. Again, the board meetings, I think this was a good first step. I think it could have been better, could have been more uniform. I think some of the meetings allowed for more questions, like Dr. Simmons got a lot of good questions in. Other board meetings, like maybe Dr. Stone, Rachel Stone, just Rachel, board member Rachel Stone, hers, Dr. Morgan. I think even to some degree Gasper, it could have been more, and I would even say Knudsen, could have been more questions asked and given. The program was supposed to be for 2 hours, and we only got like an hour and a half to ask questions. I didn't even see nobody ask questions live. So just think that could have been done better. And John, you can kind of close us out with some final thoughts in about 30 seconds.
Understood. So for me, I felt like it was there wasn't a lot of substantive questions being asked. I don't think that my looking at the questions that were put into the Slido, or where we deposit our questions. There were some good questions being asked there. They just weren't being entertained at the town hall. So a lot of them didn't make it to be asked, especially at Dr. Morgan's and also at Stone's. Some of the questions they just didn't. Well, Stone's kind of went down the line, and so Simmons as well. And Simmons was a little different because she was actually answering questions, so that was time there. The others where it was just a lot of ridiculous questions were being asked that weren't substantive, and I thought was a waste of time. Also, I would like to see the content mastery from the board members. So I'd like for them to be able to stand up and answer questions, and where more detailed is necessary, support come from Dr. Taylor to provide the other. But we would like to be able to know that our board members are engaged and have a good understanding of what's going on and how things should be moved forward.
Yep. All right. Well, that's going to wrap us up. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and hope y'all enjoy this. Get some out of it. Send us an email, secretary@gwinnett.naacp.com with any additional questions